Hello, this is Russ Walden with Father's Heart Ministry, and this is the Morning Light Daily Bible Study. Today we are studying John chapter 5, part 1, which will be verses 1 through 23. How to provoke us suddenly in your life. In part 1 of John 5, Jesus has an encounter with a man who, as a result, is immediately healed. When everybody around him had been waiting for long days and even months, receiving nothing. So I have a question for you. Are you tired of waiting for your miracle? Are you ready for a suddenly? Well, let me say to you that your long wait is over if we can learn from this interlude that Jesus has with this man at the pool of Bethesda. Let's begin by reading John 5, verses 1 through 23. After this, there was a feast of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Now there is at Jerusalem by the sheep market a pool, that's where sheep are bought and sold, a pool which is in the Hebrew tongue Bethesda, having 5 porches. In these lay a great multitude of impotent folk, blind, halt, withered, and waiting for the moving of the water. For an angel went down at a certain season into the pool and troubled the water. Whosoever then first, after the troubling of the water, stepped in, was made whole of whatever disease he had. And a certain man was there, which had an infirmity 38 years. When Jesus saw him lie, and knew that he had been now a long time in that case, he said unto him, Will you be made whole? The impotent man answered him, Sir, I have no man, when the water is troubled, to put me into the pool. But while I am coming, another steps down before me. Jesus said unto him, Rise, take up your bed and walk. And immediately the man was made whole, and took up his bed and walked. And on the same day was the Sabbath. The Jews therefore said unto him that was cured, It is the Sabbath day, it is not lawful for you to carry your bed. He answered unto him, He that hath made me whole, the same said unto me, Take up thy bed and walk. Then asked they him, What man is that which said unto you, Take up your bed and walk? And he that was healed wist not who it was, for Jesus had conveyed himself away, a multitude being in that place. Afterward, Jesus found him in the temple and said unto him, Behold, you are made whole, sin no more, lest a worse thing come unto you. That gives us an idea that perhaps it was some sin on this man's part that put him in the condition that he was in. The man departed and told the Jews that it was Jesus who had made him whole. And therefore did the Jews persecute Jesus and sought to slay him, because he had done these things on the Sabbath. But Jesus answered them and said, My Father works, and hitherto do I work. Therefore the Jews sought the more to kill him, because not only had he broken the Sabbath, but said also that God was his Father, making himself equal with God. Then Jesus said unto them, Verily, verily, I say unto you, now here, listen to this verse, the Son can do nothing of himself but what he sees the Father do. For what things soever he does, these do also the Son likewise. So Jesus only does what he saw the Father do. For the Father loves the Son, and shows him all things that he himself does, and he will show him greater works than these, that you may marvel. For as the Father raises up the dead and quickeneth them, even so the Son quickeneth whom he will. For the Father judges no man, but hath committed all judgment unto the Son, that all men should honor the Son, even as they honor the Father. He that honoreth not the Son, honoreth not the Father that sent him. Isn't that interesting? That all men should honor the Son, even as they honor the Father. He that honoreth not the Son, honoreth not the Father that hath sent him. That's part 1 of John chapter 5. In John 4, we saw Jesus leave Judea because there was gossip in the first part of the chapter about the fact that his followers were more in number than the followers of Jesus. And so now at the time of the feast, Jesus returns to Judea and he makes his way past the sheep market. It's a type of the church. And nearby there is a pool called Bethsaida, and it has 5 porches. These 5 porches represent the fivefold ministry of Ephesians 4. At this pool, there's this great multitude of impotent folk. Reminds me of the church. Blind, halt, withered, and waiting. What are they waiting for? An annual visit of an angel. The angel would come and trouble the water, and the first person in would be miraculously healed, while everybody else moving too slowly. You know, you ever been late for a move of God? You get there and you just hear about what God did, and you don't see anything of what God is doing. So the ones moving too slowly would just have to drag themselves out of the pool, soaking wet, still in their diseased state. Now Jesus shows up, and he's not by himself. He's got the 12 with him, and we know from our study that he's got the 70 with him as well. He comes to Jerusalem, stirs up the people in the previous chapter by turning over the tables of the money changers. Then he leaves and goes to Galilee, and through the region of the Jordan, he's gaining more followers than John the Baptist, and they accuse him of being a sheep stealer from John the Baptist's ministry. The gossip mill is going full stream, and he heads back to Galilee, but then he has this questionable interlude with the woman of Samaria, the woman at the well, a woman with a bad reputation who's even among her own people. It didn't make sense. Jesus is bouncing back and forth different places, and it had to just raise the eyebrows of his followers. And finally they kind of settle in there in Galilee, and now Jesus is heading back to Jerusalem. And as soon as he gets there, there's problems. Can you imagine how it wore out the 12 and perhaps the 70? Among the 70, we know from church history, was James, the brother of Jesus. Not James the apostle, but James, the brother of Jesus. See, James was with the family of Jesus when they came with Mary in Cana to take Jesus by force back to Galilee because they said he was beside himself. But at some point, James had a change of heart, and he became committed to Christ, not as one of the 12, but as one of the 70. But I wonder how thin his tolerance was for the illogical pace of Jesus' ministry, even his travel itinerary. Now, there's just a lot of metaphor in John 5, pointing to the church. It's a scenario set up by God because God sent the angel once a year, annually, for just one day out of the year to heal one person out of a multitude and leave thousands disappointed. Do you think God was just taunting these people? Or was he setting the stage for a message that would be conveyed by the actions of Jesus to this day? They used to think that the Pool of Bethesda didn't exist till they found it in Jerusalem, and we'd been there when we visited Israel. Notice that when Jesus comes, he comes by way of the sheep market. God's people are sheep. And in the sheep market's where we buy and sell the sheep. Sounds like the church to me. See, when Jesus ascended up after his resurrection, he appointed one of the fivefold ministries to the church to be named as pastor, which if you look at the definition, that means shepherd. And we, as believers, are the flock of God. Jesus is the head shepherd, and our pastors are under shepherds under him, or at least that's the way it's supposed to be. So again, what does the sheep market speak of? Have you ever looked out at the sea of faces in some mega church congregation and think, my, what a huge sheep shed, what a huge sheep market this is? Because there's a business side, a market side to ministry, a market side to the church. And the sheep are the commodity held at a premium that are bought and sold in the sheep market. And at what point does the marketplace atmosphere of modern capitalism invade the church and somehow intersect with God's plan? Bethesda, Jesus goes right on past all of this, and he goes to Bethesda. and it means house of kindness. But that's very odd whenever it was a place where thousands of people would be deliberately disappointed by not being the one person who would get healed once a year. Does that sound like kindness to you? Why would God call it that? Because he was saying something. He had set that up with 5 porches and a pool of refreshing and a miracle that took place once a year nearby the sheep market. It's interesting that what we find here in Bethesda reflects what we see in the church. If we have the fivefold ministry, we also have 5 porches at Bethesda, speaking of the fivefold ministry. So does that not speak to you? And what are we having? This great multitude of hurting people laying around this pool with all these ministries or porches. See, that's what the number 5 represents in connection to the administration of the church. Jesus gave us 5 ministries: apostle, prophet, evangelist, pastors, and teachers. They are there in type and shadow, in proximity to and in support of this multitude of people. But what are the people? Blind, halt, withered, and waiting. Sound like any congregation you've sat in recently? What does that communicate to us? Blind Christians. They can't see past their own self-interest into the deeper things of God. Halt Christians. Longing to follow after the things of the Spirit. But how many times have you heard somebody say, well, Pastor, I just can't walk that walk? What about withered Christians? There's a lot of withered Christians today. Are you a withered Christian? This is an interesting word. It means scorched. How many of you have said, I'm burnt, bruh? I've been church hurt. They say twice burned, once smart. They say, I will never trust a preacher again. Is that you? Do you know anybody like this? Are you a withered Christian? What about waiting Christians? Waiting on the rapture, waiting on God, waiting on their ship to come in, waiting on the Iraqi dinar to revalue. Everything will be better after a while. We'll understand it better by and by. Is that you? Is that working for you? What are we waiting for? Every one of these people would tell you that they were waiting on a move. They were waiting for the troubling of the waters. Among those that believe in the fivefold ministry, those who believe what we call the fullness of the Spirit, that's the paradigm. We look back on past moves of God, and we shouldn't move the old waymarks. But sometimes we pine for the days of signs and wonders. And we're looking forward to the days ahead, knowing that one of these days the waters will be troubled and something new will happen. But there can be a problem with this paradigm when the move comes, because when the move comes, sometimes the first ones in get healed, but everybody else just gets wet. What does it mean they just get wet? Water represents the Word. Ephesians 5 tells us of the water of the Word. The water that is troubled brings the miracle, but afterwards all that's left is doctrine. And isn't that the way it happens? Those that were at Azusa Street in 1906, when it first broke out, were partakers of a world-shaking revival. Everybody else that showed up got a newsletter and a Sunday school lesson. How many thousands since then have been given Pentecostal doctrine more than they have experienced Pentecostal power? The first ones in got the miracle, the last ones in just got wet. Frank Bartleman was a newspaper man at the Azusa Street mission when the revival broke out. He made the observation of the diminishing returns of the revival in the words, when they put the sign up that read Apostolic Faith Mission, the revival was over. The first ones in got the miracle, everybody else just got the doctrine. The same has been the sad experience of every major move of God. Where's the charismatic move of the 1960s? Gone. Where are the healing revivals of the 1950s? A dim memory. What about Lakeland, Pensacola, Smithton, or Toronto? You go to Pensacola today, it's a train wreck. All gone. And the revivals that took place there, nothing more than an orientation packet filled with teaching and anecdotes, but the power is gone. Aren't you tired of showing up a day late and $1 short for the move of God? Jesus gives us the answer. In verses 5 and 6, Jesus comes in and he encounters a man in this situation who's been waiting on a move. Are you waiting on a move? He'd been there for 38 years. 38 means conformity to that which has been rejected. This man had been getting with the plan for 38 years. He had been attending all the meetings. He had heard about gold teeth being filled, gold dust, and orbs. He had all the DVDs, CDs, cassette tapes, and 8-tracks, and the LPs of revival accounts, but he was not getting better. Listen, I was involved in a situation where a Christian woman took her life. And we were asked to go in and deal with some of her possessions. And we found tubs and tubs and tubs of every cutting-edge book, every cutting-edge teaching, every cutting-edge DVD, CD, you name it, marked, annotated, highlighted, giving ample evidence. But this was a woman who was not first in at the troubling of the water. She had all the doctrine of the move of God and none of the experience, and she took her life waiting for that which never came for her. Thank God for Jesus. Jesus comes up to this pitiful man who has spent his whole life waiting on a move of God, and he's not getting any better. He isn't getting a move, but what happens? The visitation. Jesus shows up himself and says, do you even want to get better? Jesus asks him a question. Do you understand that Jesus sees you? He sees that you have some blindness in your spiritual sight. He sees that you have some things you can't walk out. He sees that you're withered, that you've been burnt or church hurt. What is the answer? He asked the man the question, will you be made whole? Are you willing to give up waiting on a move? If giving that up and embracing who Jesus is in your heart and life will bring transformation? Would you like to have what thousands of people around you have been waiting for only to go away disappointed? This man, can you imagine how he answered? He's being invited to get on the inside track of a miracle. But notice he says, I have no man. I don't have anybody. And Jesus in his own life didn't measure up. What about the 5 porch ministries? No, they're just there to keep you comfortable, blind, halt, withered, and waiting. The apostle. Listen, you're moving it up. Don't put the word apostle in front of your life unless you can prove it with unimpeachable signs, miracles, and wonders. You're not ready. You might be a baby apostle, and you cannot demand apostolic deference if you're not moving in apostolic power. And I say that to you as a prophet of God. We've all heard about the apostle, the prophet, the evangelist, the pastor, the teacher. But after buying into all of that, are you any closer to your miracle? Jesus sweeps all of those objections aside and just tells the man, rise up and walk. In other words, Jesus invites the man to walk into what everyone else was waiting for. What did he have to do? Rise up and walk. It's time for you to walk into what everybody else is waiting for. And what happens next? In the midst of it, he got his suddenly. In the midst of it, he got his immediately. If you're willing to commit to God's process, you'll receive his outcome a lot sooner than you think. What do you think everybody else thought lying around that place? Well, that's not fair. I believe if they had only laid hold on the faith that Jesus gave that one man, every one of them would have been instantaneously healed, and they all would have left, just vacate the whole obnoxious place. Then there were the Pharisees. They didn't like how this was done. They said, in effect, Jesus, we don't have a problem with what you did. We have a problem with when you did it. You didn't do it under my auspices. Oh, you can do a miracle, but you can't do it unless I'm given my covering. God could care less about what you think your authority is. I don't have a problem with, but shouldn't have done it on that particular day. Listen, when you're dealing with leaders who are preoccupied with whether or not they sanctioned what you're called to do, you need to get out from under those leaders. Are you listening? Because outside the parameters of the little strutting Napoleon jurisdictions they operate in, there are hurting people that are ready for a miracle. Just as this situation with Jesus in this original story here in John chapter 5. And of course, this sets the scene for the Pharisees and the Sadducees to just put away all pretense that they were tolerating Jesus, and openly do they just know they're out to kill him. Listen, when you rise, take up your bed and walk, and start walking into what others are waiting for, people will question you and people will get upset. You will provoke the inner Pharisee of some of the most spiritual people in your life, because you're looking at Jesus himself and not looking at what they're vainly promising that maybe one person every once in a while might get and everybody else just has to sit around waiting for. Jesus cut crosswise across hundreds of years of religious tradition to appropriate for this impotent man and to appropriate for you today a level of the miraculous that is hardly heard of even in our day. And he gives us the secret in John 5:19. I only do what I see the Father do. Are you waiting on a suddenly? And then it's not sudden? Oh, it's going to be a suddenly, then it's not sudden. And then you start talking yourself into it. Get out of that. Stop doing that. Jesus gives the simple reply in John 5:19. Just do what you see the Father do. When you do what you see the Father do, everything becomes as effective as if God said it or did it. Are you listening to me? I'm trying to help you. He said the Son can do nothing of himself but what he sees the Father do. For what things soever he does, these doth also the Son also, or likewise. Learn to only do what you see the Father do. If you don't know where to start, then I suggest you get in the life of somebody who does. No matter what it takes. Sometimes it takes more than a book table. If you ever hope to walk in what others have waited for years for in vain, are you ready to stand up? Are you ready to stand up on your feet and take responsibility for your own walk with God? To stop reclining in impotence and leaning upon a pastor, prophet, evangelist, pastor, teacher, apostle who can only support you blind, halt, withered, and waiting. Are you ready to walk away from that which has been rejected and to have that one day of your life setting aside, waiting on a move, and accepting the visitation of heaven, and your whole life is changed? Today is your day. I want you to go to altarcall.net. I can't bring you to a physical altar, but I can send you to a digital altar. I want you to go to the digital altar at altarcall.net. And I want you to choose the prayer request form, and I want you to enter your prayer request and say, Brother Walden, I'm not going to wait any longer. I'm going to stop waiting on the troubling of the water. I'm going to accept the visitation of my miracle in the person of who Jesus is in my life right now. If you do that, something's going to happen to you radically to change your life for the rest of your life. God bless you.